Welcome everybody to October's Lumar webinar. This month, spookily entitled "The Silence of the SERPs: An SEO Website Migration Survival Guide." Effectively, what we're going to be covering is SEO migration nightmare stories, your standard Halloween fare. Joining me today, well, my name is Chris. I'm a senior technical SEO here at Lumar, and joining me today is Sophie Gibson, technical SEO director at StudioHawk. Sophie, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get cracking.
Yeah, hi. So, as Chris said, I'm the technical SEO director at StudioHawk. So we're SEO agency. We just do SEO, nothing else. And I've been agency side for, I think, around 7 or 8 years. So I've seen a fair share of migrations over the time. So this is going to be mostly coming from the kind of agency perspective, working with clients, and some of those kind of one-sentence horror stories, which when you get an email from a client with one of these lines in, that you're in for a bad time. So yeah, I'm going to be going through some of those today.
And you may well recognise, Sophie, it's worth saying, from every single screen at Brighton SEO the last couple of years or so, for some reason, they've taken a great shine to a picture of Sophie on the main stage, and believe me, you will see her hundreds of times should you ever attend Brighton SEO. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, if you just want to hop over to the next slide for me, Sophie. So yeah, okay, I've explained who we are, and the agenda today. I'll do a quick intro and some housekeeping, and then Sophie is going to go over the above, so international sites, new website launches, CMS changes, and then some questions and answers. Next slide. Yeah, very quickly. If you've got questions, type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I might field some while we're going, if I think they're super relevant at the time. But quite often what we'll do is we'll cover them off at the end. After this, there will be a feedback form that you'll get in your email. It takes less than 1 minute to complete. If you can do that, that'd be great for us, because it allows us to make this content even better and make sure that people get what they want. And then the on-demand version will be shared in a few days once it's kind of been edited down by our team. I think that takes us. Oh, sorry, closed captions. Click on the captions icon, CC in Zoom. Obviously, with this being live, they are live captions. So there's only. So I do apologise for any bad captioning in that. And then, as I say, yeah, the webinar recording will be distributed in a few days. Next slide. Okay, so just before we get started, everybody who's in the chat here, very quickly, we'd just like to know sort of how many website migrations have you overseen in your time as an SEO? Little thing should be popping up in your Zoom right now. You let us know. That would be absolutely fantastic. We'll give it a few seconds. I assume, Sophie, if you've done like 7, 8 years agency side, the answer from yourself is absolutely loads now.
Yeah, I'd say definitely 11 plus at this point, in various guises and forms.
Yeah, it was always weird for us because I spent a lot of time in-house. I spent like 12 or 13 years in-house, but I felt like we were always migrating something, right? From we were always moving something into something because there was always a new shiny thing that somebody had seen in the distance. So I kind of feel like of the various different types of migrations, we'd covered an awful lot of them off. Okay, so that's interesting. So 43%, so roughly half, 1 to 3, 26% 4 to 10, 20% 11 plus, and a few people who said none. People who said none, this is going to be hopefully a great whistle-stop tour of all the things you shouldn't do. And all the people 1 to 3, again, hopefully you've never made any of the mistakes, and it'll help you out moving forward. So with that, I am going to pass over to Sophie. I am going to largely shut up, but I will chime in, if I think I've got something interesting to say.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Oh, so I'm going to go through a few different sentences and then a few key scenarios of what's happened or what was happening in the migration and some of how those turned into some horror stories. So number one is a client saying to you, we've launched a new international site. So the scenario was moving from a .co.uk to a .com to be able to sell items worldwide. They were looking at expanding, which obviously tends to be a simple migration if it's just a domain name change. But there are some things that you do need to watch out for, because the issue that we found with these is that they managed to launch multiple subfolders at the same time due to this international expansion that were all in English, but for lots of different languages. Now, you might be wondering, how many subfolders did they launch? They actually launched with 197 different subfolders. So this was for every single location, any single country in the world, which obviously was a bit of a duplicate content nightmare. They were targeting countries such as Gibraltar with 32,000 people in there. I don't think they need a separate website to be able to buy from you.
So just so I can be totally clear on this, sorry, Sophie. So the 197 pages, each targeting a separate country, but every single one of them in English, and I assume with the same content on every page.
Exact same content. All that changed was the subfolder that each thing was under. So, like I said, we had en-gl, but 197 different variations of this.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and some other things that we also needed to watch out for due to this international expansion was that they also added automatic GeoIP redirects in to get people to the right version of that 197 subdomains that we had for every country for their particular country. Now, we know Google often argues against you should not force users to be moved to a particular location, because the exact same will happen to Googlebot. It will go to the US version and the US version only. It might be able to find the other ones, but I mean, if it's got 197 to go through, that's quite a lot. So this is what happened. So the forced redirect went in and everything, all the traffic kind of dropped off a cliff to their main sites, because their main target audience was the UK. They were just pushing to go into different areas like Europe and shipping to the US, for example. So what you need to do is making sure that none of this, that this is all, encountered and addressed. So we needed to make sure this redirect was removed. I think some of the main culprits are a lot of the automatic stuff that is meant to deal with this internationalization. Companies like Globally, there's also lots of general apps that work to push people to the right location. I believe Shopify markets also have their own version of forced IP redirects. So making sure that we've kind of removed these forced redirects, I suppose, to the only one version, and making sure everything's accessible. And of course, we're still in the middle of reducing down all of the marketplaces from 197 to the actual main 5 locations that they actually sell to. So we still have to have some work to go with that. But it just goes to show how quickly stuff can change if you're not checking, because the migration itself was fine from .com to .co.uk. It was just all of the extra variables that were brought into play because of this internationalization and because they were trying to target all of these places without a kind of a plan in place. So what are some things you can do to address this? So a lot of it is asking clients what markets they're actually moving into and how they are doing this. And this is really key to see if you can join in those planning calls, because how they set it up from the beginning is going to massively impact what's either possible for SEO or what are the main things that are going to be changing because of that. And as well, just making sure that the clients have guidance on their options that can explain the impact on SEO, even if this is way before they've even mentioned what CMS they might be using, how they're going to do the internationalization, because there's always different ways to implement, subfolder versus subdomain. Are they going to release separate domains for each version? There's so many different ways you can go international, even if before you've gotten onto that kind of part of the story, making sure that they've got, even if it's generic, they just understand the impact, all of the different options and ways that that they could implement would impact SEO, and what your recommendations would be in an ideal scenario. And also double check how they plan on getting website visitors to the correct country, because often nobody thinks in terms of SEO for this. They're thinking, actually, we just need to make sure people are on the right version of the site, for sales or for tax reasons. They're not often thinking about how it actually impacts SEO. So it's one thing to always check when you hear the word international or expanding internationally, just to check what solutions they're thinking about putting in place for those actual country visitors and how to direct them to the right site. So I do have a second poll question for everyone. This is the class, but what is the actual shortest notice period you've had of an upcoming website migration project? Because you would be surprised the amount of people who I've had surprise migrations. I'm hoping other people have also been in the same boat. So sometimes you might get a little bit, but yeah, I'd be interested to see whether anybody's actually had 6 months plus notice of the site migration. I'm thinking potentially for those larger projects where businesses understand that it's going to be a big process.
I was just about to say, I have, in nearly 15 years of doing this, had my first ever 6 months notice about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued to see how many people have had that sort of notice, because I've definitely gone on a website and they've changed domain names and not told anyone about it until I went to check up. I was like, what happened?
And it's not even always like the big brands aren't even immune to it either. Here we go. 30% not told at all. That seems about right. 36% 1 month. So that's interesting. It seems you're either told a month out, not at all, or 6 months. It's very few people who get a week's notice. That's interesting, because I feel like a week you can at least drop everything and do something, right? Whereas not told at all being the second most popular answer is terrifying and probably rings fairly true.
Yeah, we've had quite a few of those in my time, not told at all. Although sometimes you get told, different things, but hopefully that poll will make sense with my next few points. So it's the client saying, we're going to be launching a new website. So this sometimes can strike fear in the hearts, especially those 30% of people who often don't get anything, any notice. But they say, it's tomorrow. I know we put 1 week as one option, but or it was last week and we've not told you. So things we need to watch out for. So the big one you have is when the site is completely different, every single URL is changed, no redirects are in place, nothing's been done, everything is different, there's nothing you can do at this point because all the actions have been done. So what do we even need to do in this scenario? Again, it's one of those things we've really got to be reactive. You're just going to have to jump on these things and do the quick things that you can do first. So making sure some of those main page redirects are in place, even if you can only get the top 4 or 5 pages, or you just getting kind of a site-wide moving over if, for example, URLs have stayed the same, making sure that initial redirect action is in first, then start running crawls in the background, making sure you've got all the data to figure out what on earth you need to do. And I think this is where checklists do come in really handy, although also they're handy throughout the whole process, but being able to quickly go through checklists and just hit all of the main points that might be an issue, then you get a really nice quick way of viewing all of the actions that you might need to get done. And this is where hopefully you might have a good relationship with the client, but trying to get everyone internally to help with that. So with those checklists, you can hopefully then delegate that to any tasks internally. So if they've got an internal development team or an external development team, you can say, hey, can we send off this batch of tasks to do with redirects then? For the content team, can we go through maybe some URLs have changed and they just need to recategorize some pages? Figure out what can be done right this minute and delegate those to the right people, because the more you do need all hands on deck. And this is where hopefully if you're agency side, you've got a few people who will be able to jump in last minute to do some stuff like redirect mapping, and helping you analyze any crawl results just to figure out what we do actually need to get done as a priority and what those changes are, seeing as they're completely new to you and you have no idea what has changed because you don't know what was actually originally scoped. And I think just straight away letting the client know exactly, like, there is going to be an impact on SEO, depending on especially how long the site's been live and you've not noticed, or if you've been given very short notice, like a day, say that we've not been able to be as thorough, there's design changes that are going to have an impact that we can't change straight away. But just give a ballpark kind of estimate of what might they expect. And you can do a full analysis later of the length of time it's gone. But just being clear up front, there's going to be an impact. We might see, say, for example, 40% of traffic's gone. We said might see this for a while until we do X, Y, and Z. So yeah, just being really clear on that communications of what is happening, because I think the clearer you are with that, the less questions you get maybe a month later when they're like, where's our organic traffic gone? You can say there is going to be an impact, over and over again, but until you kind of start putting some numbers to it, a client cannot really understand the actual scale of the impact that not planning would have had on them. So those are my tips for those kind of unexpected migrations, at least. And I think moving on, there's another story that I like. We're just moving CMS, nothing is changing. So you'd think this is fairly straightforward, especially if the domain names remain the same, the design. So this was our scenario. It was just a CMS change. The content was able to be the same, going to be the exact same. The design also was just recreated on a different CMS. All of the URLs were still able to remain the same for all of the site. So nothing was changing. So SEO didn't need to get involved because nothing was changing. So obviously you need to watch out with that, because the unexpected does happen, because what this client accidentally did was change the default domain from non-www to their www version. So what actually happened with this? It was literally just a toggle in the back end. So they'd moved to Squarespace, and there's just a setting in the back, which is like use the www prefix that they'd managed to turn on accidentally. So obviously for Google, they were seeing, oh, this is a completely new site because it's all been moved. So luckily we managed to catch this before it caused too much damage. But small things like this can and do crop up. So some of my tips for stuff you need to kind of address anything that happens like that is any CMS moves, just having a look at some generic CMS guidelines on how the different ones work, and looking at and knowing and understanding what the differences for SEO between different platforms are. For example, Shopify is a good one because they have a static URL format, so you know that if they're moving to that, you're going to have to do redirects. You're going to have to map the products to the new product URLs, because you might not be able to maintain the same kind of path structure with that. So just being familiarizing yourself with the different CMSs, what the main differences between them are, what you can and can't do in terms of SEO, and just being able to communicate that to the client. Like, here are the things that might come up if you're looking at moving CMSs. Again, just getting in touch and being slightly proactive with that. And again, check everything. Even if a client says that there's going to be no SEO impact, or the development agency have assured them that there's no SEO impact, and they've had a look through the staging site a million times and everything's fine. Things do and can crop up that people haven't expected. There might just be a tick box in the back end that's been changing. The different configurations can really impact on how the site is actually set up and what URLs it shows and how it's all connected. So making sure that those are all checked off is fine. And another one is, when you're kind of putting together checklists on stuff like this, is using kind of pass/fail criteria. So being able to say that for a URL to remain the same, it needs to have the same path, the same domain, the same version of www. It needs to have HTTPS if we're having a secure site. It needs to remain that. And then all versions need to redirect to the one true version. So making that really obvious when you're writing up what must happen in terms of SEO, because sometimes you need to make sure that all of the actions are super obvious, because what's obvious to us as an SEO might not be obvious to a client or to a development team. So being able to really spell it out, what is correct and what is not correct, can really help stop any of these issues popping up later down the line. And again, like I said, double check everything, because something will have gone wrong somewhere. There will be something that has changed that you might not have noticed. And
yeah.
100%.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in there and say a couple of things as well on that. Is CMS nowadays, especially, is such a vague term, isn't it? And you can find sometimes that a new CMS might have its own handler for robots.txt, so it might all of a sudden start preferring to use the robots.txt that it's got rather than the one that's controlled by Cloudflare or whatever in the background. And the other big thing I think when it comes to CMS is checking. We as SEOs care more about things like tag pages and pagination pages than most other people in the business, I would say. So it's one of those things. Okay, the posts have all stayed the same. That's fine, but have we generated 300,000 pages of tags because all this stuff that we kept back? So I think it's always interesting to look around the edges, I think, for this stuff, because with the best will in the world, at the end of the day, if there's no SEO requirements, you can't test against them, right? And if they're not tested against, then you don't know they're going to pass.
Yeah, exactly. There is so much to do with independent configurations. And yeah, you're right. Pagination is a big one. Filters are a big one as well. Like some CMSs use filtration, especially in e-commerce, I find. I think definitely for e-commerce, you really need to make pay special attention to how filters are handled, how collections are handled, how products in collections are handled, how how everything is connected. Like you said, those blog tag filters, are you porting them over from WordPress and are you going to WordPress and you've suddenly gathered hundreds and thousands of tag pages because you've imported some tags across with everything. But I think sometimes this kind of come with time and just being familiar with these. But there's a lot of content around online which will hopefully give you a bit of a steer, especially if you're working with a CMS you've not worked with before, just to be able to give some guidance at least to your clients. So I kind of wanted to go into a bit of the things of why do these like issues or do these horror stories pop up all of the time? And sometimes it's stuff like business reasons. So for example, that move internationally, there could be some business reasons as to why they couldn't do one into one implementation versus another. So for example, for the geo IP redirect, is it because they've got an actual tax reason that they want to focus, that move people into the right country site? There's always decisions in the background that you might not be aware of. So I think being aware or trying to get into those early conversations about those business reasons, so you can better understand what their project requirements are and you can advise much better. And I think a lot of it as well is on a lack of client SEO knowledge, because often, especially if they're moving sites and they've got a development agency, they're translating everything from two different sides, and they don't know what to ask their development agency. They don't know what to tell you. When they say, oh, we're just having a redesign, that might be their understanding, but actually what they mean is a load of different things are changing. But because everyone internally has been talking about the website redesign, it doesn't occur to them that actually they're going to need some extra support. And I think that's also a thing with lack of clarity on scope. So they just don't understand what the scope of the project is. And this is where it's really important to be there when they initially start talking about redesign. You'd be like, oh, there's a lot of stuff that I can help with. And I'd love to be in some of those conversations about what the scope of the project is. I think asking questions is really key. So, what do you need to know to be able to advise them correctly? So you kind of cut off any of those issues before they begin. And again, getting in conversations with developers, just having the eyes on the ball of knowing what's actually happening. Because this is what usually happens. The client says, this is what our new site is going to look like, or this is what our new site is going to do, this is what we're going to happen. And what you actually end up with is a monstrosity like this that you now have to fix. So the earlier you can get in on those conversations, to be like, actually, we shouldn't be, we need some more fingers to go in the horror hedgehog, and don't use gummy teeth, the better. So I think some of my final tips are to make sure all this goes well is asking lots of questions before any migration or site design go ahead. Like, what CMS are you using? Are you going internationally? How are you doing that? How are you getting people over to the right places? Who's going to be involved? Do you know what's going to be changing? Can you loop me in with the development team that's doing the website? Can I have a quick call with them to find out what's happening? So really quizzing clients and not taking what they say on face value, because they just might not have that SEO knowledge to understand or to really view the scope of the project as it really is. And the more detail you can get beforehand, the more you can plan and the more you can talk to your client. And this is where the education part comes in. So creating and sharing guidance documents, even if they're super generic, helping your client make that decision with more of an SEO mind, or just at least making them aware of what the options are and what the different SEO impacts they might have. Even if it's super generic and you use it all the time to send to different clients, I think having this guidance is super useful. Again, just to educate the client there, and also try and make the obvious. So again, as I mentioned, what might be obvious to you as to what keeping the URL the same means might not be obvious to other people. So adding those pass-fail type qualifiers in, just so you make sure you're actually spelling everything out and making everything super obvious, because what might be obvious to us is not super obvious to other people who are not in the industry all the time. And it's that continued education. So making sure the client understands what site changes have SEO effects in general, because I think if you do this before they've even hinted at the word migration, the earlier you can start educating clients on, in general, what changes have impacts. For example, design changes, actually that you wouldn't think the client would necessarily think there'd be an impact because it's just how it looks. But if you can talk about, hey, if you change this in the CMS, then this might happen, or we don't try and use images as links because it's hard to see. If we take loads of sections out, we might lose internal links to items, and that's going to affect how those pages perform. If we're not keeping the site designs the exact same, or at least the same kind of links in there, those could be the impacts. So educating their internal content team about URL changes. So if they're creating a new post or if they're writing a blog post, do they understand around having a redirect if they've created a duplicate version? Do they understand about best practices for being able to name posts so they're kind of user-friendly from the start? And I think building up that education right from the very start of the relationship can really help them actually come to you first before they start implementing stuff, because they know that you will probably either have some kind of resource or that they're actually aware of the different variables that can have an impact, so they know when to loop you in. Because I think that's a big issue. Clients just don't know that they're going to need your help or that you can even help. So spelling out all the stuff you can help with. So hey, just to let you know, if you're going to go through a web design, we can review wireframes, or we can review the designs for any SEO impact. Hey, if you were thinking about writing some blog posts and you have a big internal team, do you want us to do a session with you on that? We can produce some guidance for your internal team with those top tips in, and just that continual education piece. So they come to you first because they know they can. And that helps so much better, because then at that point, you're not then surprised at a migration, because they hopefully will then think, hey, this probably will have an impact. Let's loop in the SEO team to have a look at this. And it's kind of stopping the problem before it becomes that big monster that you have to then tackle. And the more you can do beforehand to even stop it getting to that place in the first place, the better.
Yeah, I think it's just before we jump into questions, I think that the key thing that I take from this, and the key thing from my experience in this stuff, is that expect the unexpected and expect chaos. And I would rather be in a position where everything was at least ran past me, even if you can go, no, that doesn't affect me at all, move on. When I used to work for a travel business, we used to have we changed our provider of flights. And as part of the migration over to the new using the new provider, some bright soul somewhere decided that site.com/flight star should then basically be handled by the third party, which was absolutely fine, apart from the fact that our sitemap for flights sat on site.com/flight sitemap, which then meant that sitemap then broke. I assumed I didn't need to get involved because it was just a change to all this stuff was actually hidden behind a form. So I immediately thought, oh, there's nothing I can even possibly be involved in to be involved with this. Turns out, yes, it is, and this is the sort of thing I'm talking. The rule that pushed the users over to the third party was ahead of the rule that pushed them to our sitemaps. So that broke. So these little things are just kind of chaos waiting to happen, and even the best informed dev, and even sometimes the best informed SEO, these things can happen because sometimes just such a weird little set of circumstances happens that you never really. Sometimes stuff happens that you couldn't possibly have predicted, really, unless you had had a sight over absolutely everything.
Yeah, very true. You can't be everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff will come up, and stuff will change. I think with every site migration, there's always a different problem that I've never seen happen in each and every one. I'm like, oh, that's so you're right. Prepare for the unexpected, and I think always as soon as anything goes live, I try and reserve some time for like panic zone, as in if something's launching, making sure I've got maybe an hour or two booked out in the calendar just in case, because like you said, something might pop up, and if it doesn't, great. If you do a crawl and everything's actually a-okay, nothing's changed from prior to the last one, or the changes are what you expected, you get a couple of hours back, and in the worst case scenario, you actually have time and space to be able to jump on something if something should happen.
Yeah, and leading on from that, never do it on a Friday.
No, never on a Friday.
Okay, cool. Jumping into questions, there's a few questions already in the Q&A. So we're going to go through those, and then we'll. So if you do have any questions, feel free to fire them in. So I'll go from the bottom up because the first one's quite long. Actually, no, we'll start with this one just to get it done. I'm going to slightly paraphrase this, but effectively, Ivan here is saying they've got multiple sites. They're planning to migrate into one new website that they're referring to as newwebsite.com. They'd like to publish some of the content that is on the old websites onto the new one. So which of the two scenarios is the best to do? Or are there more options? So scenario one is to put content live on newwebsite.com and let it index, and then redirect the duplicate content from oldwebsite.com to newwebsite.com. This is in advance of any migration happening, so we'd have a few different websites that do redirect over into the new one. Scenario two, put the content live on newwebsite.com and no index it. The duplicate content remains live and indexed on the old websites until we come to migrate, at which point they take the no index off and then put the redirect in. Now, this is interesting because I don't know which I'd choose. No, I think I do. I don't think I
don't like option 2 only because as soon as somebody mentions a no index tag going on somewhere, I'm like, that's
never coming off.
That will probably cause an issue. But I actually think the best scenario is, I'm just thinking, I'm pretty sure Wise did a case study of exactly what they did for this exact same scenario, porting some different language folders. But I can't remember for the life of me whether they published stuff first and then redirected it, or whether they just slowly ported stuff over and did a redirect straight away.
See, for me, option 3 would be just put the new content live when the new site goes live and do the redirects then. Is going to be the cleanest way. You are still going to see, I suppose, by putting the content there early and getting the redirect in, you are ameliorating some of that migration dip that you're always going to see. But also at the same time, like you say, I'm always a little bit nervous of the more moving parts. The more moving parts there are in a migration, one, the harder it is to keep track of them, and two, the harder it is to work out necessarily or to blame a particular thing. So there we go. Yeah, I think my answer would be 3. Just do it as part of the migration when it happens. And I think, Sophie, you're leaning towards 1 with the proviso of see if you can find that Wise case study, which may well help you out on that one. Second question with regards to that. In terms of these multiple migrations, all these old websites to newwebsite.com, can we redirect multiple websites at the same time, or do it gradually and one by one?
I think definitely gradually. You could do it all at once, but I think depending on how big the sites are, I think if it's small, then you could potentially get away with doing it all at once. But I think it takes so long for Google to understand that one thing has moved to another, that to really minimize the impact on traffic, especially if you want to make it stable throughout the process, that slowly moving each one once one started to pick up traffic is the best way to make sure you're kind of like mitigating your losses. Because as you mentioned, it's like the more moving parts, the more you invite issues. So I think the slower you can do it and in just one chunk at a time, it really helps mitigate those issues that can come up.
Because I think as well, let's say you're moving 5 sites into one site. Each of those migrations is probably going to have at least one weird issue that you're going to have to go back and look at. Could be something very minor, could also be something very major. Whereas if you do those 5 sites all at the same time, you're then having to... Doing a migration is stressful enough. Doing 5 migrations at once is even more is easily 10 times more stressful.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of like when if you're doing them all at once, if you're doing them separately, sometimes you can pick up on a weird issue that only affect that, and now it's only affecting a small section. because it's that's just that one site that you're transferring. And then you can use that knowledge to be like, I know this is going to be an issue. Let's make sure that the other sites are actually clear of this issue before I start migrating them over, or at least being aware, like, oh, something weird happens with this section of the site. I need to, make a plan for that. I think it's good for that because you can learn from that first run through, I suppose. You can learn from those mistakes or learn from those like weird issues that pop up. So it's not as traumatic to do the other 4, for example, because you're already aware of what that weird issue is, and you're not dealing with 5 times the issue if you did it all at once and it came up and you weren't, hadn't planned for it.
Right, we're going to move on. So I think we've got time for one more question. I'm just going to quickly say, anonymous attendee, your question about existing French versions and the UK website being rebranded. What I'm going to say is that feels like something that would require a bit of research on my part. Would be if you can catch me on LinkedIn, or myself and Sophie on LinkedIn, I'm sure we'd be happy to help out with something like that. But that I don't want to give advice on that one without going off and doing a bit of research. So we're going to stick with something a little bit easier here. From Theo, how can we convince product owners to prioritize highly important SEO features over business required features?
Oh, that's always a tricky one. There's usually 3 aspects to convincing clients with competitors. So saying, look what they're doing. So to try and kind of convince them with, well, everyone else has got this, you're not going to have it, and how's that going to look, that kind of thing. Money, be like, if you're prioritizing X business feature, the feature that we're recommending for SEO, we're predicting would bring in X amount of value, especially on ecom when you can kind of calculate that a bit more, putting that actual figure on the actual impact that change might have, because that really helps with that prioritization, because generally the higher up these decisions go, the more that they don't care about what it is, they care about how much money it's going to bring in. So using that as kind of a convincing thing, saying we're missing out on this massive piece of opportunity. I think that's always worth kind of doing in that kind of priority time. And I think just getting an eye on overall of what their main business goals are, because it might be that you're not making recommendations that are aligning quite as well with their business goals as the kind of new products that they're trying to put out. So I think it's always worth positioning yourself as, if you've got if your competitors are doing it, you've got some money to money assigned to your SEO action, then saying as well, it really is going to help your overall goal of growing this area of the site. You've told us you want to grow X product, but you're now launching Y product, but this product can bring in so much more money. I think that's really, really good things to highlight in terms of the prioritization, as well as showing how difficult stuff might be. Being able to scope out, have properly checked tickets. I think if you check out Adam Gent's kind of blog posts, he talks a lot about how to make sure that your recommendations are aligned with their goals and how to convince people to put in SEO actions. He's got some really great content around that, so I would definitely check that out.
Yeah, my answer is a little bit more blunt. Ask the PPC team to put together a report saying how much it would cost to backfill a 20% drop in SEO traffic. And all of a sudden you'll find that things get done. But especially again, so like where I used to work, we were like 60% SEO traffic, right? So you kind of say, well, we represent more than half the traffic, and it's free traffic in your eyes. So let's try and keep that the same, and not cut our own hands off just to spite ourselves. So yeah, right. If you could just go forward one more slide, Sophie, because I think we've hit the end of the webinar. A few more things to briefly talk about here. If you'd like to request a demo from Lumar, there's a link on the screen there, or there is also a QR code if you've got your phone to hand. We've got the Lumar blog at lumar.io/blog. And then our next webinar is in November, which is titled Does Google Even Care About Core Web Vitals? Not sure who's hosting that one, but I'm sure they won't have as cool a Halloween guest. Well, it won't be Halloween by then, so it'll be weird if they do. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming out, folks. Thank you to Sophie. Yeah, my name's been Chris. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.